Yeah, let's do this. Okay, this is the morning after putting the guides onto the blank. First part, we took the guides off. Yesterday we put them on. After Gerald went back home, I couldn't wait till today before we could record putting a finish on it, so I figured I'd put my first finish on it. My first epoxy finish on the guides. That went pretty well. I brought it upstairs, dry a little quicker. I got up to go to the washroom at 12:30 in the morning, and my rod had knocked off the rotating, my little rotating machine. Thankfully, it was almost cured, but I ended up with a couple drips. But it fell on with the guides pointing down, so the drips are on the bottom side of the blank. It wasn't quite cured yet, so I managed to push some in. It'll do. It'll do. I'm not going to retie the blank, and it doesn't have anything to do with operating the blank itself. The blank will work perfectly. So what we're going to do today we're going to nip off the finishing threads that I still have on blank itself. I'll nip them off, and we'll put a finishing coat of epoxy on it. And we're going to change the tip top. And then that should wrap things up. Now that I got the first coat of epoxy on there, I don't have to worry about moving my guides. So now we'll take the tip top off. We'll replace it with a 16 mil tip top. We've gone through this before. It's no real big deal taking the tip top off. Now it looks like to me like the epoxy goes onto the barrel of the tip top a little bit. But I got a feeling once I put the heat on there, it'll be fine. So, here we go. There it goes. Tip top gone. This is my new one. Now let's talk a little bit about the size of the tip top. Like most North American rods, the tip tops are tiny. They're like an 8 mil, 10 mil at the most. Now to get a 16 mil ring on your tip top, you got to go to saltwater. Now saltwater blanks have too big of a barrel. Now this barrel size here is 3 mil. Now it looks to me like the original one is a little smaller than that, because when I go to put this one on, it's a little bit loose. But it's no big deal. It's not too loose, so I'll shove enough glue in there that it'll take up the spaces and it'll be a done deal. So, hey, why don't we do that right now? Glue from a glue gun. I did have some rod-specific glue for tip tops. I had it for years. Now I can't find it anymore. I don't know if it was very much different than what this stuff is. I'll cut a couple slivers off of there, shove it into the barrel of this tip top, heat it up, put her on, line her up. It'll harden within seconds, and we're good to go. If you would get a tip top that the barrel is too big, all you got to do is wrap some thread on this section the same way you did for that guide. Give it a little coat of epoxy. Now that'll make that tip section thicker, where you'll be able to get the tip top on. Now thankfully we don't have to do that with this one, and it looks like it's going to fall right back into place where the other one was. And then when I'm putting the last coat of epoxy, I'll put a little bit of epoxy on there. You'll never know it changed. Let's cut a couple slivers of this glue off so I can slide into that blank. Not into the blank, into the tip top. So that's it. Push it in. Push it in. I usually shove as much of that in there as I could. If there's too much, it'll bubble over and the overflow will come out. Okay, that don't look too bad there. Maybe I'll take a pin and see if I can shove it all the way down to the end. Okay. One more little piece. There you go. Now all I got to do is heat that up. That's going to melt the glue. I put it on my tip top, and then I'm going to line it up straight with the rest. There we go. All the guides are straight up. That looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to cool off. It's going to seize up in no time at all. While it's doing that, let's get rid of these threads. So like I said, I leave the threads on because if I try to cut them as close as I could after I wrap the thread, I risk nicking my original thread that I was wrapping with, and then it always leaves a little knob or a little fray, and when I put my clear coat on, I always get a little bump there. Now I can always trim it like I'm going to do now, but I'd rather leave that like that and now trim it. There you go. Now that's pretty well clean. Now I can always push it down a little bit. If there's a little bit of a bump, I can always push it down a little bit with my fingernail or a popsicle stick or the back of this. And when I put my next coat of epoxy on that, it'll hide everything. Okay, the tip top, it's anchored. Now I'll get rid of a little bit of that soot off of there before I put my coat of epoxy on it. So that part is done. So there you go. So I'll put this one aside, and I'm not going to try again to put the epoxy on the full 9-footer. I'm going to do half a section at a time. I'm going to do this half section, and we don't have to go through and do the bottom half. It's a no-brainer after you see me do the first one. So the epoxy I'm using, I got this stuff from Amazon. Great stuff. Great stuff. Because the original epoxy I used to use, it was thinner. And it would take more coats to cover the guide. Now, this time, I just went with one coat of this stuff. And now, all I need is a thin coat of this now to finish that off. And we're good to go. So I found myself another little piece of plastic tube. I put it into my little motor, which is like a mini barbecue motor. I've had it for years, but I've always had a problem holding the right shaft or whatever. I do got a beautiful little chuck I can use that I also bought from Netcraft, but I never got the proper coupling to join the shaft on there to the shaft on here. So who knows, maybe someday that would be the ticket, but hey, procrastinator the way I am, I'd rather be fishing than staying home working on something. Okay, now when we're mixing this stuff, you got to be pretty accurate, because if you got more resin than hardener, it'll stay sticky. If you got more hardener than resin, you can get away with it. It will harden, and it'll get rid of the stickiness. There's no better way to stay accurate than using a little syringe. Just make sure that you don't mix your syringes, because this one here is the hardener. Now, if I stuck that into the resin and tried to suck some out, it could contaminate that resin, and that resin eventually would start hardening. Just make sure that your little hypodermics are clean, and I keep them on the same bottle all the time. That way I can never make a mistake. And in that way I know I've got exactly the same. So now, I'm going to go 2 mil. That way, if I got a little left over, I'd rather have a little bit left over than not enough. So that was the hardener, now the resin. Same amount, 2 mil. So, when you mix it, you don't have to go too wild at it, because if you mix it too fast, too much, it'll get air bubbles. And well, they don't always come out, the air bubbles. I'm more the kind of guy that uses and abuses my tackle. Actually, these rods, when I first bought them, the first day out, I got a wild hit to the side, my whole pod flipped over, almost lost one of the rods, and by the time it was all said and done, I had these major big scratches all over the brand new rod. But I didn't break it. And my theory is, if I break a rod, it's a good excuse to get a new one. Okay, that should do me. Now this stuff will start hardening and start coagulating after about 6 to 8 hours. But it'll stay sticky for another 4 hours after that, so that makes it 12 hours. After 12 hours, it's pretty well coagulated and it's not going to drip. But I usually like to leave it on my rotating machine here for at least 20 hours, 18 hours. And another nice thing about this stuff, when it dries, not sticky at all, no fingerprints. I'm loving this stuff. So let's turn on the little rotator. And we're rolling. I'm going to put a little bit of tape on the back here, just to make sure we don't have any more accidents. Now, being daytime, I can keep an eye on it today. So if it does let go, I can recuperate a little quicker. Boy, I'm glad I did wake up in the middle of the night and I did notice it. Now, as far as brushes, hey, pick your artist brush. Pick any brush you want. I find the softer bristles do a better job than the harder bristles. Does it make a difference? I'll let you decide. So right here where I changed the tip top, I'll put a little bit, split it half and half with the old wrap and onto this section. And at this point, you can put it on really thick if you want. And as long as it's rotating, it's not going to drip. Done deal. Okay, I can see the seam a little bit. I'm not worried about that. It's looking good. Okay, now onto the guide. Now, another thing I should mention, when I put the epoxy on, I try to put as much epoxy at first underneath the guide right there and underneath there. Because like I said, from the side of the guide foot to the blank, there's a little bit of a void there. And you want that epoxy to go into that void to fill that up. And that plays a big part into anchoring your guide on there. So now, and now that I did put a lot of epoxy there, I'm not too worried about putting any more. There's plenty there. Like I said, you can put it on pretty thick. And if you don't like how thick it is, you can always take some off with the brush afterwards. See, there again, if you manipulate that too much with your fingers, and you got oily fingers, the epoxy ain't going to stick. But that's looking pretty good. So now the other one. That's looking good. Now it is thick, but like I said, most of the blanks, most of the pre-made rods that I've bought, The epoxy is very thick. I usually call this a controlled drip, because if it wasn't rotating, it would be a mean drip. It all levels off, and you get a nice big thick finish. Well, that's it. Now look underneath it. If there's a really big drip, I'll take some of that excess off. Now this one's shown a little bit on the top side, but there again, that's going to equal out. Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. Okay. Covered. Okay. And like I said, once that's dry, I'll do the same with this. Same process. Don't have to go over it again. And once that's dry, the job is done. Can't wait to get out and do more fishing. Now, speaking of that, I don't know when the next time's going to be when we can get out fishing, pal.
Yeah.
Everything is freezing up solid. We even had some winter spots that would stay free. And okay, Gerald and I, we managed to get our January carp. And our season started last February, so we've done our 12 months of carping. So for our January carp, we ended up having to go out of town to an area we had heard got cold water carp. First time there, we got there, we did manage one. So, okay. That was my 12 months of carping. Now, we were going to do whatever we could to get Gerald one. Well, we come back home. Gerald dropped me off at 3 o'clock, went back home, picked up the kids from school. His boy said he wanted to go fishing. Gerald still wanted his January carp, so it didn't take much talking into.
Nope.
So he went back after dark with his 6-year-old boy. And they stayed till midnight. They got 2 carp. Congrats, my friend. Now we both got our 12 months of carping. Been there, done that. Make me a t-shirt. And I'll tell you, that little XJ, Gerald's boy, 6 years old, he's a hardcore fisherman just like his old man. And he's got a picture of a carp he's holding. No bigger smile. That warms my heart whenever I can see a young person doing that. So, that being said, let you know next time we get out. For now, we're done with rebuilding my 2 9-foot, 3.5-pound curved carp rods. Next time we get together in a week from now, we'll be doing some tank tested. Who knows, maybe we'll even try a little bit today. I hope you're able to use something from what I shared here, even if it's replacing a broken guide, a tip top. Like I said, it's not rocket science. It's very easy. Hey, I'd hate to see you scrap a rod just because of a broken guide. So, thanks a lot for joining us. And until next time, tight line and hope you get lucky.